Okay.
All right, do you guys know what the name of this class is? Did I ever tell you? Here's the name of the class. It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine.
And I feel fine. Okay.
That song is a song by REM. It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. Remember that? In many ways, that is what this book is trying to say, but it does it in a really tough way, right? Last week, we
Yeah.
went through all of those opening of the seals, and that was not a pretty story.
No.
Yeah.
Let me get that in here. The bad part is it gets worse several times
Uh-huh.
before you get to the end.
Okay.
All right, and today is one of those days where it goes from to worse. But let me remind you of what you need to remember from last week. There were two really important chapters. One was the one that just precedes the ones we're going to read today. Today we're going to start at chapter 8, and
Right.
right before that, chapter 7 is about 144,000. Remember that? Remember what was important about that number?
Oh, boy.
It was big.
It was big.
Yeah, I wish I could remember.
It was 12,000 from this tribe and 12,000 from that tribe and 12,000 from that tribe. If that wasn't enough for you, it was also a great multitude from every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. So it was big numbers,
Okay.
not small numbers. And forever, when people look at this book, they see small numbers. Only a few of us are going to be saved. Only a few of us are doing it the right way, and that's not the story. But the other side, the other thing you need to remember from last week is just as important. It was a particular character that was there, and it was the character who has everything right. Remember, his name was Seth.
What?
Seth does everything right perfectly. I'm just.
You're a funny man.
It was the lamb. Remember, the lamb was the only one who could open up
The lamb.
right? And this weak little lamb, not this great big powerful lion. And most of this book is about it's about refuting our tendency to look for the powerful and the strong and the knowledgeable and the right answer and everything that does it right, and instead to look for where the lamb is at work. Now that's especially important in this next section because it's a hard section. It's an ugly section. And so I'm going to talk to you quite a bit about it so you understand it before we go and read it. Because if you just read it, all you're going to hear is ugly.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
It helps if you know what's happening right at the beginning. Eugene Peterson is a hero of mine. Eugene Peterson is the one who did the Message Bible. Have you seen that Bible? Okay. He also did most of his work in the Psalms. He is a poet at heart, and so he sees this book as poetry, imagery, and all of that. And he wrote a book called Reversed Thunder. Okay, it's a great book. It's a great book about the book of Revelation. He takes it about 2 chapters at a time, and all of his titles of his chapters are something like the last word on blank. So this section, these 2 chapters, is the last word on prayer. This is what he sees it as being, and I think that this is really important. It starts off, if you remember, they were opening the scrolls. The seals on the scroll.
Yeah.
And it got to the 6th seal, and it said, and as we're getting ready to open the 7th seal, it pauses. It says for about a half hour it pauses. And then it says that they took the incense and an abundance of incense, I think it says, and mixes it with the prayers of the saints. and then takes that and throws it down to earth and causes chaos, causes earthquakes, causes fire, all kinds of stuff. Then starts the trumpets. And there's 7 trumpets. Now that's important because what does 7 always mean?
Perfection.
Perfection, God.
God.
7 is the number of God. And so these 7 trumpets are announcing God. And what you're going to hear and what people forever try to make this section into is things like, look at all the bad people. Look what they're causing. It's important for you to realize this is God's work, according to the Revelator. Now, you don't have to believe in God in the same way as the Revelator, but you have to know that that's what he's saying. He's trying to say God is at work here. Now, maybe in these first 6 seals, that was all the evil of the world, but in this one, and all these trumpets, this is God is at work. God is at work in all of this, and it's ugly. And it's horrific horror that rains down on the earth because of God. And so I don't want you to be in denial about the fact that that's what he's trying to say, is that God has extreme power. He's putting that in there because he's saying, this is what they try to do, but look how much more powerful God is. I'm not even certain he's saying that God does these things. He's just saying God is much more powerful than all that stuff that happened last week. Okay, all the things as all the 7 seals open, God can do much more than that. That makes sense? So kind of hold on to that this is prayer and this is God's work, and that'll help you to understand this a little bit easier. Notice I didn't say it will be easy, because it's not. It's an ugly section. Okay? So here's what it says. When the Lamb opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. And I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and the 7 trumpets were given to them. Another angel with a golden censer came and stood at the altar. He was given a great quantity of incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar that is before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints rose before God from the hand of the angel. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it on the earth. And there were peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. In fact, my friend that I told you about, Eugene Peterson, that's why he called it reversed thunder, because he's taking the thunder of the first things and he's throwing it back as a reversed thunder. Okay, that's a phrase he borrowed from someone else, but I like that he decided to use that for how he views this whole book. Now the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets made ready to blow them. The first angel blew his trumpet, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and they were hurled to the earth, and a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. The second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood. A third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. The third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is wormwood, which is a very bitter plant. A third of the water became wormwood, and many died from the water because it was made bitter. The fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of their light was darkened. A third of the day was kept from shining, and likewise the night. Then I looked, and I heard an eagle crying with a loud voice as it flew in mid-heaven. Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth at the blasts of the other trumpets that the 3 angels are about to blow. And the fifth angel blew his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from heaven to earth, and he was given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit. He opened the shaft of the bottomless pit, and from the shaft rose smoke like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened with smoke from the shaft. Then from the smoke came locusts on the earth, and they were given authority like the authority of scorpions of the earth. They were told not to damage the grass of the earth. And let me just mention, the grass was already completely destroyed, but here it is again. So even this book is not perfect, it has a little inconsistencies. Sorry about that. Then the smoke, they were told not to damage the grass of the earth or any green growth of any tree, but only those people who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. They were allowed to torture them for 5 months, but not to kill them. And their torture was like the torture of a scorpion when it stings someone. And in those days, people will seek death, but will not find it. They will long to die, but death will flee from them. In appearance, the locusts were like horses equipped for battle. On their heads were what looked like crowns of gold. Their faces were like human faces, their hair like women's hair, and their teeth like lions' teeth. They had scales like iron breastplates, and the noise of their wings were like the noise of many chariots with horses rushing into battle. They have tails like scorpions, with stingers, and in their tails is their power to harm people for 5 months. They have as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek he is called Apollyon. The first woe has passed, there are still 2 woes to come. Then the sixth angel blew his trumpet, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar before God, saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, release the 4 angels who are bound to the great river Euphrates. So the 4 angels were released, who had been held ready for the hour, the day, the month, and the year, to kill 1/3 of humankind. The number of the troops of cavalry was 200 million. I heard their number. And this was how I saw the horses in my vision. The riders wore breastplates the color of fire and of sapphire and of sulfur. The heads of the horses were like lions' heads, and fire and smoke and sulfur came out of their mouths. By these 3 plagues, 1/3 of humankind was killed, by the fire and smoke and sulfur coming out of their mouths. For the power of the horses is in their mouths and in their tails. Their tails are like serpents having heads, and with them they inflict harm. The rest of humankind, who were not killed by these plagues, did not repent of the works of their hands or give up worshiping demons and idols of gold and silver and bronze and stone and wood, which cannot see or hear or walk. And they did not repent of their murders or their sorceries or their fornications or their thefts.
It's a lot.
Pretty light reading, huh? How many love that?
Loved it? No, didn't love it.
No.
You're not supposed to like it. It's supposed to be ugly, it's supposed to be difficult, it's supposed to be challenging, especially for me, because of one thing. This is God doing all of this. Did you recognize
I know,
that?
which makes me wonder, how do you put trust in a God that would do all this?
How do you put trust in a God that would do all this? As part
Yeah, I
of
want to know how you're going to spin this.
So she said, how are you going to spin this? How are we going to make sense of it? What do you think it's supposed to mean? And the hard part is this is what we've done all the time. We've decided that this is really describing not God, but the evil one. And you know why we do that?
Makes us feel better.
Makes us feel better. It is a much simpler narrative.
Mm-hmm.
If we can say it's all those evil people and we have to fight against that, it's a much simpler way to do it. But this is God doing it. And it's emerging out of what? Right at the beginning of this section. All of this destruction is emerging from what? So 7 trumpets.
All the prayers and stuff that were thrown on earth.
We send up the prayers that the 144,000 in the grand multitude have brought to the altar of God. That in those prayers of pain and of struggle and whatnot, God reacts with this kind of thing. Now, I don't believe in a God that does that. That's a very vindictive God to me. But the imagery is important. That he's saying God has power beyond what we have power to do. All that stuff that happened last week, all those seals and what was happening in that, do you see how this surpasses that?
Mhm.
This is bigger, this is more, this is something that you should understand can outdo whatever it is you do. Now, you may not think or want God to act that way. That's not the point. The point is that God has the power to be able to the revelator.
Has the power, yeah.
Okay? And that you have
Jim, why would he go negative like that though? Why couldn't he, I mean,
you're theologizing
What-
too much.
pardon me?
You're theologizing too much. It's not theology, it's experiential. Put it in the context of how you felt with last thing, and then say, but God can do more. Now,
Okay.
it's more destruction. I don't like that. But God can do more. God can do wonderful. And why does God need to do more? Well, it's pretty simple. A third of everything got destroyed. A third of the rivers, a third of the earth, a third of the earth, all the grass. And what was the final result of all that?
Nobody changed.
Nobody changed. Did you get that? Here it is again. I'll read it to you again. The rest of humankind who were not killed by these plagues did not repent of the work of their hands or give up worshiping demons and idols of gold and silver and bronze and stone and wood, which cannot see or hear or walk. And they did not repent of their murders or their sorceries or their fornications or their thefts. I'm pretty sure that's what my mom thought I was like when I was growing up. Whatever she did sure wasn't seeming to make a difference. What was going to turn me, change me, draw me into something new? And there was a whole bunch that doesn't do that. Do you have any kind of story like that at all? Or were you the obedient child?
Well, it kind of led to the spare the rod, spoil the child mentality where kids could be beat.
Well, let me just talk about that. 6th grade, I was in this little school with 18 kids. We me and my friend put every name of those 18 kids on a piece of paper, and we counted how many swats every kid got during a particular period. Guess who made sure that they won that contest?
You,
So guess how much that rod changed my behavior?
0.
0,
I think
yeah.
that's the point.
Maybe that's the point exactly.
Maybe the point of that is that you can't change someone with violence.
Yeah.
You have to change them with love.
Well, you can change them, but not, you can change them through I'm sorry, I work with abused kids, so it's like, I have a whole different take on that whole thing than what you're doing, because I'm not talking about kids getting swatted, it's like, I'm talking about abuse and kids being, I'm sorry, a lot of kids didn't have your mentality, Jim.
Yeah,
A lot of kids, that whole thing was devastating.
I don't disagree with you, but let me go down that road. Why is it that today we don't SWAT like we used to? It's because people were doing it not in a way to correct their children, but because they were damn mad and they were just going to inflict this violence because they were angry, they wanted to do something, and it made them feel better. So do you see how they saw okay to continue down that same road? We do the same thing in a number of different ways. Instead of asking what it is that we've done in the world that has caused so many people to lose their home, how much we've done in Central America, for example, we blame Central Americans for coming and crossing our borders, stealing our jobs. And see, we aim it at the other person and we don't change our behavior at all.
Yeah.
And so on a regular basis, we use our behavior to try to change someone else instead of trying to work on ourselves. And that's definitely what has happened with this story. It was God who has the keys to that bottomless pit. It is God who let Abaddon loose. All the locusts that look like scorpions, hellish scorpions. That was all God. That was not the evil one. And yet Christians have spent forever trying to fight against this. But he was pretty clear. This is God at work. It sucks as a definition for God, but what's more important is what is the definition of humankind that it's trying to portray. How much we don't listen, how much we don't change, how much we don't take at heart what it is that God is trying to do. Now, you might not have been like me, where you turned SWATs into a game, and so took away the very effectiveness that they ever had in it. But I'm guessing that you didn't always completely listen to the people in authority around you. Maybe Beth, because she's pretty perfect.
I just learned how to hide.
Yeah, we do, don't we? We learn how to hide our behavior. We learn how to
Run out of the house.
outside of the norm. However we deviate from that norm, we learn how to hide it. Explain it away.
Or it comes out in other ways. You become a school shooter, you become a monster of yourself.
Yeah, and think about that. Anybody who becomes a school shooter, I can almost guarantee you that they got some kind of narrative going on in their head that says, I'm going to fix this thing that's wrong. Right? And so it gives them permission to be able to do a horrendous act, right? The killing of children. And yet they sit in a space very typically of self-righteousness about that.
Or going in and killing a former teacher because they didn't like that teacher,
Yeah,
as is what happened yesterday or today,
yeah.
yesterday.
And I think sometimes it comes down to the imagery and how we interpret it. So think about trumpets. Through the history of humankind, what are trumpets used for? The blast of a trumpet, what's it mean?
A herald, an alert, an award, a start of war.
Yeah, and that last one is a very typical way that I think we continue to use trumpets. Oh, this is calling me into battle. I have to fight against. But God is the one who's doing this. And those trumpets are not calling us into battle against God, are they? But that's an easy way to be able to interpret it. What's another way that we use trumpets that might be a better thing?
Aren't the herald angels? The heralding of the angels include trumpets?
Right. It's calling us to something marvelous and wondrous, calling us into being. Very often it would be that like a school bell that would call people to a square, to gather into community, into a space where something was supposed to happen. What's about to come here in this place? Instead, we see it as, what do I stop from happening? And maybe we're supposed to be saying, what could happen? How can I be open to? See, just that one little way of looking at something different. Can you see how it changes everything?
Mhm.
Are
I
we-
think he went about it in a really wonky way.
He did go about it in a really wonky way. Partially that's because he comes from a very different place, though. It was much more private place. And the people that we're talking about, the people that he's writing to, faced a lot of danger, a lot of fear invoking things, a lot of persecution. They, in different communities there was probably a very real possibility that if you acted too Christian, proclaimed your Christianity too much, that you were going to die.
Mhm.
Well, also Caesar was God.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, maybe part of it was to say, okay, so this guy over here, Caesar, claims that he's God and he's done all these things. He's taken lives, he's, you know, gone and taken countries and stuff like that. But God is way more powerful.
Yep, and way different than just that.
Yeah.
Here's what Eugene Peterson says about it, because you're exactly right. The mood of the trumpets is of fresh beginnings and victorious actions. With prayer, Eugene Peterson says, we do not see only the terror, but also the possibilities. With prayer, the terror has lost its power over us. With prayer, we see the strength within us and around us. So what is it that the trumpets are calling us to? I think it's calling us to different directions. First of all, that we pray so that we hear God's voice.
Mm.
And we acknowledge that God is hearing our voice, right?
Mhm.
And we don't have to go back to the definitions of prayer to get that. I think it's this calling beyond just ourselves and into the greater whole, right? But the second is, if someone is speaking and no one listens, if God is saying, this is who I am, and no one listens, what happens to that conversation?
Stops.
It's
Nothing.
And so part of prayer is not just us lifting up the woes that we're going through, but us listening to how God is at work in those woes. And I think we have a really hard time doing that because like what often happens with this section, we decide, I already got the right answer and it's them. I already got the right answer and I got to beat them. I already got the right answer and I got to do this. And we forget to listen for God. We forget to trust in that larger whole.
Yeah.
Let me make it really clear. How many have a really hard time seeing somebody with a red hat on as being part of God's people here on earth?
Mm.
There you
I don't really.
Just certain red hats, just certain ones.
Yeah. But we all draw lines about who is God's and who is not God's too easily. Because they're doing the very same thing, right? Who is it that's doing the right thing for our country? Who is it that's acting the right way? They think they have the right answer. And at least part of this is saying, going back to the chapter before, where we're talking about the 144 enormous thousands, could they be part of that group as well? And could they allow us to be part of that group? Or do we automatically write them out of the story and they us?
That's a good question.
But according to all of this, God is doing that.
God is doing that.
God is raining hell, damn fire and salt. You know, it's like, if you're not saved, you're going to hell.
Yep,
Hell, sorry, I've heard this enough that it's like,
yep. But
this
that's,
is not,
that's not what I'm saying, Judy. I'm saying,
that's not what I'm hearing, and I don't understand what else you're trying to say.
so let me say it again. God does what God does. God has, I think what it's saying here is God has the power to do whatever God does.
Mhm.
Okay, and he's contrasting this, the writer is contrasting this to the plagues that were talked about last week. And that God is bigger and better. Now, it's horrible that he uses death and a third of everything is destroyed and everything like that. And I think that's a horrible image that way. But that's not the point. The point is that God is larger and more than what that other stuff is, what those other people are. That God can do more than that. And can you be part of what God is doing? Not be part of the damnation of the other people, because that's the bad part. Is the first thing that's easiest to do is to point fingers and say that person is wrong. Instead of saying that thing they're advocating for is wrong. And it's really hard to separate issue from person, isn't it?
Sure.
Yep, it is hard.
Mhm.
We're
Yeah,
just gonna
it is.
get out of this a little bit, 'cause I'm having a really hard time with this. To me, 95, maybe even more of the percentage of the people who read this Revelations do not read it the way you are.
That's right. But that's why I'm teaching this, Judy.
That's why we're having the class.
I know that, I realize that, but what I'm saying is, this is a very minority view you're putting out there, and what this whole, and I appreciate, I'll just kind of back up now, because I'm hearing I'm hearing all the evangelicals in my head, and what they're saying, what they told me about.
That's right. And that's because we all hear that.
Mhm.
This book has been told for such a long time and so insistently in one way that we have a hard time hearing it in any other ways. One of the writers that I saw referenced in one of the books, Yehizel Landau, said that for many Christians, it sounds like this: for God so loved the earth that he sent World War III.
Hmm.
Exactly.
I
And if you don't read exactly as I do, you're just not gonna.
I can, both my kids are pastors and they both came from the same seminary and they have ongoing conversations on Facebook about lots of different things with those classmates and then classmates from other seminaries.
Uh-huh.
And I am constantly surprised at how much those seminarians love Revelations.
Yeah,
Hmm.
So this is a struggle for me.
Yeah.
Having been raised with a totally different, of course,
Okay.
I was raised Catholic and we weren't smart enough to read the Bible.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
we didn't have to do any of that work. But there must be a growing different way of thinking about Revelations, because it just seems like so many Stuart who
Yeah.
grew up here.
Yeah,
Revelations is.
Yeah, right.
yes, absolutely.
But
And it's because of this. You should hate the interpretations of Revelation you've been given. You should. Those are wrong. They're poor. Another writer, Barbara Rossing, who wrote a book called The Rapture Exposed. And she talks a lot about the rapture
Theology.
theology and just all about it's more than just the theology. It's also like this whole way of being that some people live under. And
Mhm.
I asked one little girl about that. Where is it? Why do evangelical readers love Revelation so much? And there's a remarkable answer that the girl gave. It brings the Bible alive. It brings the Bible alive, and I think it does. And you should understand that that's why I love it, because it brings the Bible alive better than all of the theological books, all of the teaching books. This is an alive thing. But she says, but then they pair it with this violent, fear-based metaphor.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And that they continue to tell violence and fear in there. Thus you get World War III as being a Christian value. And that should never be. And yet,
Right.
what?
No worship.
That's right. And we have got to, I believe, start telling a different story that uses this same book, but draws different conclusions out of it. And it may continue to be a minority story, Judy, because there's a lot of people that have for a lot of centuries told the fear-based story. And it's absolutely wrong. Fear is never a part of the gospel. That's not a Christian value.
What is the symbol of three? What is the third? What is the symbol of a third of this, a third of this? I know that three is a symbol in the Bible.
It's basically saying, it's very clearly saying, God doesn't destroy everything. Right? He's choosing what to destroy. Because he's saying, like, I could send wormwood and do everything, but I'm not going to.
By the way, wormwood also doesn't allow anything else to grow around it,
Uh-huh,
and it poisons the soil,
uh-huh,
so that nothing grows forever.
uh-huh, uh-huh.
You know, worm from draining.
Huh.
And so it's saying in the midst of where God could, God is not. Right? God's not destroying everything. God could, but God's not. And so in a very weird way, it's saying, look how benevolent our God is. But Christians have done that type of story all the time. John Calvin was known to say, well, some people are sent to hell to show how good God is about saving the ones who don't get sent to hell. Well, that doesn't seem like a good way to show that God is loving to me. That's the type of story we've told a lot of times. And so I think it's that type of story that is saying here. The hard part is it's a lot of centuries of the other story.
Yeah.
So that's why I push this book, because I think we've got to tell this story the right way more often. And not that I have a perfect interpretation, but it's got to fit in with the greater story of what is Christianity. And what is Christianity based on?
Love.
Love. And that other story of destruction is not a Christian story. Go ahead.
Well, I think, you know, as we're looking at this, and it is a very ugly section of the book, it's also, on the other hand, to put a positive spin on it, really hopeful, because we still have 2/3 left. You know, we're still here. We have 2/3 to work with. Of course, we're not sure what's coming up with the bowls yet, but, you know, because we haven't gotten there. But we've got 2/3 of everything left. Huh?
We got a lot of ugly to go. We haven't gotten to a dragon, a couple of these. Well, one's kind of.
I know.
We got, you know, the harlot of the earth, right?
Thanks, babe.
Okay, okay,
We got plenty of ugly to go.
okay.
So it's not like it's over, but you're right, that can we see that there is hope in here? And here's where I think it is. First of all, that our prayers have an effect on heaven.
Mm-hmm.
That as we are in relationship to God, and I don't mean prayers just as God kill them and God does. But there's something that happens back and forth, which draws us into partnership with God. And so it means that we have to be listening for and be active in. Now, be careful, because you don't want to do the same thing in return that has often been done to you. You don't want to say, I have God's permission to smite you. I have God's permission to kill you. I have God's permission to hate you. Right? That's not what you want to do. And that's been done way too much using these passages. You have to be able to say, God is at work here, and so can I.
So getting back to the prayers that people send
Yes.
up to God.
Yes.
what kind of prayers? Does it say what kind of prayers those were, or does it just talk about the prayer?
It doesn't really, it has some general things that say something along the lines of. Many of the 144,000 are underneath the altar of God because they were killed for their faith. And so part of the prayer would be, stop this killing, bring me back to life. Right, type of prayers. And that's an appropriate type of prayer. If you've ever lost someone, a prayer, especially if it's been in some kind of a violent action, it is really hard to be Christian in response to that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? How do you ever forgive the person who killed a loved one? Even worse, how does a 13-year-old who was raped by her father ever be able to have a good view of a father again,
Mhm.
of a man again? Right?
Right,
How do we redeem those types of spaces? Because her prayer, whether she thinks she's praying or not, that's a valid prayer that we, church, as well as God, ought to hear. Isn't it? And how do we sit in that space where that prayer right now is unanswered for her? The problem is that we've often said, get over it, honey. That happened a long time ago, or, you know, God is still Father, and that should redeem the word for you. None of which is really sitting in a prayerful space with that young lady. Or with any of the ones who have lost someone dear to them because of. How do we sit differently? This continues into the next chapters, and we're gonna have to go pretty quick because we only have about 15 minutes left. But it's saying that the next thing that happens, prayer becomes in chapters 10 and 11, becomes witness. Speaking about it, becoming something of the word embodied in the world. The hard part is it's an ugly place too. So let me get there and just read. I'm not going to read all of it, but I'm going to read part. I'm going to skip completely over. No, I'm going to read some of it. I'm going to skip over 10, which basically I know it's about the little scroll, and the little scroll tastes good in your mouth, but is bad in your stomach, right? I'm just going to skip over that for now because I want to get to the two witnesses. Then I was given a measuring rod like a staff, and I was told, come and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship there. But do not measure the court outside the temple. Leave that out, for it is given over to the nations, and they will trample over the holy city for 42 months. Remember that, 42
months, okay.
And I will grant my two witnesses authority to prophesy for 1,260 days. Remember that, 1,260 days. Want me to give you an easy way to remember it?
60 days.
42 months.
Wow.
There are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And if anyone wants to harm them, fire pours from their mouth and consumes their floor. Anyone who wants to harm them must be killed in this manner. They have authority to shut down the sky so that no rain may fall during the days of their prophesying. And they have authority over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they desire. And when the two witnesses have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up from the bottomless pit will make war on them and conquer them and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city that is prophetically called Sodom in Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. For 3.5 days, remember that number 2. For 3.5 days, members of the peoples and tribes and languages and nations will gaze at their dead bodies and refuse to let them be placed in a tomb. And the inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them and celebrate and exchange presents, because these two prophets had been a torment to the inhabitants of the earth. But after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them and they stood on their feet. They cried with a loud voice. So here's the bad thing about if you choose to be witness, choose to speak, choose to proclaim the truth as you understand it, you end up dead in the street.
Yeah, but you get resurrected.
But you get resurrected. That's where the 42 months comes in,
Okay,
where the 1,260 days comes in. That's where the 3.5 days comes in. All of those numbers are the same number, mean the same thing. 42 months, figured out. Right, 12, and 6, 3.5 years. 1,260 days, 12 and a half. 42 months or 3.5 years. 3.5 years. It's all the same number.
3.5
That's a number from the book of Daniel. And Daniel uses it to proclaim something really important. There's two things I think that really means. First of all, the way Daniel speaks it is it says it's a time, 2 times, and half a time. Time, 2 times, half a time. One of the ways I've heard that explained is, this is how long it really is, that torment, that tribulation, that trial. This is what it feels like to you. This is what it feels like to God. Whatever you're going through, however difficult it is, just know that it's not the same as what it feels like to you.
Right.
So go through it. Now, here's the other thing that's important. Number of God is
3 or 7.
7, and 3.5 is what?
Half
Half.
7.
Half of it. So it's almost nothing compared to God. It's a small little number. And it doesn't feel like it when you're going through it, because remember, times, it feels like this, but it's nothing. Get through it. You may be laying in the square and everyone's making fun of you for 3.5 days, but pretty soon you rise up again. Think about it this way. How many have lost someone dear to you for a time you could not live without tears in your eyes? And it's not that they came back alive completely, but you're no longer in quite that space. You move beyond the 3.5 days and into another way of being. Not perfectly, not wholly, not without scarring, but it didn't stay in that most difficult time,
Right.
but became something more. That's what this is saying. That whatever it is that as you proclaim your witness, as you speak, as you live your truth, as you work to change the world, not everyone's going to agree with you. There will be people who will very much be against you. And there will be moments like just in the other room in here, in 2014, November 2014, we sat and we wept together because of a certain election that happened in November of that year. We sat here and said, what do we do now? And death came upon us. And we had to figure out what to do next. And I got to tell you that we're not over the 3.5 days yet. Are we?
No.
There's still a lot of stuff that's still happening. We have to trust that it is only 3.5 days, not forever. And I intellectually know that. My spirit is still trying to find that truth. How about you?
Yeah.
Right? We are still in a place of great healing that has to happen, especially because some of the things that I'm telling you tonight are things that will fly right in the face of some of the truth finding that some of those people on the other side have draw from. And they want to be the army of God. They want to have violent means to overthrow what they see as the enemy.
Mhm.
That's not what this is preaching. Yet they use this passage to give them do that. Which is why it's so important to me that we've got to speak this book differently. We've got to speak a different message out of this, because this is one of the primary books that is fueling much of the struggle in America today.
True.
I can hurry God's second coming. I can ready for the rapture and to hell with whatever happens behind me. They like tribulation theology. They
Yeah.
think it's good for tribulation to happen. And you know why they like that?
Because they think they're going to make it out alive.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear both of you. Say it. Judy, go first.
Because this life isn't what matters.
That's part of what you say, but I don't think that's why they really like it. Go ahead.
No,
Seth, you said something.
Yeah, I said because they think they're going to be the ones that come out winners on the other side.
It's not even that. They don't even think they have to come out of it. You know why?
Right.
Well,
They get,
true. Yeah,
they get
true.
tribulation. Yeah.
Happens right after the rapture, and they think they're gone already. So they don't care if the whole rest of the world dies. They don't care if all this happens to what's left, because none of it is them. And when you remove yourself from this story, and it only happens to everyone else, you also remove the power of the story.
Right.
I've seen posts on Facebook of friends of mine who happen to be of, and I don't like using the word evangelical because I know that Methodism is supposed to be evangelical, so it doesn't resonate with me in that way. But I've actually seen posts on very conservative friends of mine. Their friends will say something like, yes, I can't wait for the rapture.
Right.
Because they're so certain they're one of them.
Yep. And it's a way of checking out of.
It's like,
They don't have to care about this earth because they're going in the rapture. And here's what I know. For 2,000 years, people have thought that right now it's going to happen. And it's left
Yes,
the world
exactly.
worse off because of that. And somehow we have to be the voice that says, I refuse to let that be the majority voice in Christianity, or a voice that's unquestioned in Christianity. We have to stand up and say, this is how I think this story should be listened to. We have to start telling that other story, because otherwise, as has happened for centuries now, that other story gets told again and again, and it is not in any way biblical or aligned with biblical values. And yet it is it is almost the unquestioned story that gets told again and again as the Christian story.
But Jim, what do you do when the evangelical preachers are telling the other story and publicizing it all over, the radio and TV and all of that kind of stuff? And it's our word, the layperson, against the clergy word.
So let me put it this way. 2 months ago, we had an event called Dare to Care, where we chose to say, young people struggling with your sexual identity, your gender identity, with whatever it is that is outside of the typical norm, we are a safe place for you to come to. We had medical professionals, we had religious professionals, we had professionals of all different sorts come together to be able to say, whatever those other churches are saying to you,
forget it.
know that that's not the only story. And for most of human history, and definitely for much of this last little while, Christianity has been too vocal in saying the other story, and those kids need to hear this story. And so it's not because everyone is going to need or want that story even, it's that somebody will. And will you be the voice of that news story for someone? All right, somebody who has been beaten down by the militaristic philosophy of that bad telling of Revelation. Can you say, I got a different way to tell it? I got a different way of seeing it.
And there are a lot of people who are in that evangelical mode that are not skilled in theology. They are not skilled in the word. They are not skilled in hermeneutics. They don't understand. They literally take the Bible and they teach themselves, which there's a lot to be said for that, but there's also a tremendous downfall in that you miss so much.
Yeah.
And taking it literal like that, and the way that they've marketed it, like you said, it brings the Bible to life and it's flashier.
Yeah.
But there aren't, in my experience, there aren't a lot of scholastic people in that movement.
There are a lot of scholastic people though that love this Bible. Some of them that repeated the old story, but most of them today are coming out with things like Barbara Rossing that say the rapture exposed. Or like Zach Hunt, who wrote a book called Unraptured. And they're saying all of that stuff is not what this is not. This is not the story of the Bible. That the story of the Bible is very different. And this is the important part. It matches the rest of the Bible. The rest of the Bible is a book of love, not a book of hate, not a book of judgment, and if you're taking this book and turning it into the one book that really pushes judgment, then you're misusing this book because that does not read through the rest of the canon. Listen how this ends. This is the end of chapter 11. Then the seventh angel blew his trumpet. Here's the seventh trumpet. The third woe. Right? There was a woe, woe, woe. Listen to what this woe is. And there were loud voices in heaven saying, the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Messiah, and he will reign forever and ever. Then the 24 elders who sit on their throne before God fell on their faces and worshiped God, singing, we give you thanks, Lord God Almighty, who are and who were, for you have taken your great power and begun to reign. The nations raged, but your wrath has come in the day of judging the dead, for rewarding your servants, the prophets and saints, and all who fear your name, both small and great, and for destroying those who destroy the earth. Then God's temple in heaven was opened, and the ark of his covenant was seen within his temple, and there were flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, an earthquake, and heavy hail. Do you see that? Terrible images at the end, but all used in a holy way. Right? Praising of God. Right? Because God in that third woe is claiming all of earth, all of us, and saying, you are mine. And the 24 elders, those of the Old Testament and those of the New Testament, those disciples and those prophets come together saying, God is here and present and doing things. Isn't that an interesting woe? And it feels like woe if what you're doing is trying to hold on to something that is not like God. That is not like how God acts and is. When you try to turn God only into judgmental, instead of remembering the wholeness of who God is, the love that God is. Whoa, whoa, whoa. The hard part is like I said, you got some pretty tough things ahead though. You got a harlot and some beasts and a dragon, and you got to deal with all those things, and it's coming up. So the difficulties are not finished, but do you begin to see what the Revelator is trying to do? Trying to help us to see all of this differently. And it's hard for us to get beyond all the language that we've used before, that we've heard for such a long time. And it has been used in such a horrendous way to bring judgment. And God is more than that judgment. We'll get to more of that. Sorry, I haven't fixed it all yet.
A lot of people reading the Bible in the old way forget that this was written by an oppressed people.
Yeah,
And it always kind of amazes me that they want to oppress other people. You know, the people that are interpreting this.
Yeah.
And forgetting that this is stuff about people who could be stoned to death or taken away and forever, disappeared and all those things.
Yeah.
They forget that this has been written by those people, but at the same time, they're perfectly willing to turn right around and oppress other people, not let them come across the border.
that's right.
Kill them
That's right.
because they killed somebody else. I'm sorry, I'm so thankful for the 3 people that decided not to give that guy the death penalty,
Yeah, yeah.
you know? It's interesting to me how that teeter-totter works.
How often? Michael Yaconelli is a wonderful author, passed away, but he wrote a couple of neat books. And one of them is life-changing for me. And in that, he tells the story of being lost in a forest and can't find his way, and just keeps going, and all of a sudden a clearing opens up and there's a house there. And there's a party going on in the house, and he's obviously not invited. He didn't even know where he was at. But he goes to the door and he's welcomed inside. And after receiving that hospitality, decides to go stand by the door to stop other people getting into the party.
That's exactly.
And that's what it
wonderful-
feels like,
yeah,
doesn't it?
that's Exactly.
Again and again, it feels like that type of story. And what this is trying to say, I think, is a
Us
gift.
4, no more.
All right, guys, thank you. Next week, we'll get into some of those horrendous beasts.
Okay,
Guys,
Thank you,
Second
Jim.
staff.
the Redeemer perfectly for you.
okay.
All right. Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.